March 10th, 2011. We are interviewing Floyd Pace at the Communication Center at Buena Vista University. Mr. Pace was born on April 19th, 1925. My name is Zoey Reisdorf, and I will be interviewing with Lindsey Peterson. Where were you when you heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
I'm sorry?
Where were you when you heard about the bombing at Pearl Harbor?
I don't think I understand. Where was I?
When you heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
Let's see. I was in Des Moines in a movie theater. And we came out, the kids were hollering, "Extra, extra," on the street, you know. Yeah. We came out middle afternoon and it had happened. Yeah, terrible.
What was your reaction towards it?
Well, I was young enough to have a certain amount of excitement, because I know it meant that some of us would be going into the service and so on. Adventure, you know, like heck. Well, anyway, there was a certain amount of excitement about it. It's terrible.
What else do you remember about those days?
Well, I suppose most of the things I remember are connected with the fact that I was courting a tall, long-stemmed beauty who later decided to live with me the rest of her life. And so it was pretty much things we were doing, bike riding, horseback riding, softball, picnics, and a lot of dancing. We had a lot of dancing in Des Moines in those days. There was a ballroom by the name of Tromar, where name bands came all the time. I remember Woody Herman came there one time, and I think it was 18 minutes that they played Woodchopper's Ball. Boy, what a show.
How did you get involved with the war?
With the war? Well, my two older brothers had been of draft age, and so they volunteered, got in. And then my twin brother and I were graduating in 1942. And he and I were very, very close brothers in many ways, but at the time that we were in our puberty stages, he had other ideas. He didn't want to go out with me. He had a girlfriend and so on. But he became very much interested in joining the military. And so he talked me into it, and I thought it was a great idea, you know. Well, we really had to work on the parents because we were only 17 at the time. We finally got them convinced that it was all right, they would sign, and then I said, okay, fine. And I can't remember now what I said to him, but at any rate he said, oh, no, I'm going alone or I'm not going. And it was kind of a blow to me because he didn't intend to hurt my feelings. It was just something that he had to do in growing up, you know. Well, at any rate, he refused. He would not go with me, so I had to wait from about, I think it was 1st of July is when he went in, and I had to wait until November. So that's the way that worked. And I went to Curtis Bay, Maryland for boot camp.
How was the experience of boot camp?
I'm sorry?
How was the experience of boot camp?
Oh, well, it was supposed to be 12 weeks, but they convinced us that we were needed badly, so we had 5 weeks of boot camp. I didn't learn to swim during boot camp, and I couldn't swim. Yes.
And what branch did you service in?
I was in the United States Coast Guard, which was a part of the Navy during World War II. I went into the Coast Guard because I thought it would deal with small boats mainly, you know, and I'd get to pilot some small boats. Well, that's a real error in thinking. 85% of the people in the Coast Guard were in war zones, on big ships or on landing craft and that kind of thing. And so, well, anyway.
How did the girl you were courting feel when you enlisted?
Pardon me?
The girl that you were seeing and taking dancing, the girl you were looking after, how did she feel when you enlisted in 42?
You know, I told you I was hard of hearing, and I am hard of hearing, but I'm hearing you, but I'm not understanding the question.
That girl you were seeing, you told us about her?
Oh, yes, Betty? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How did she feel when you enlisted?
Oh, crushed. No. No, she thought, well, a lot of us really wanted to go into the service. I didn't know of any of my friends who were going to be dodging it. None of them were going to. At any rate, I think she was kind of proud. And the day that I signed up for the military, I offered her a ring, which she accepted. So November 30th of 1942 is a kind of a supplemental anniversary, you know.
How did you stay in touch with her while you were...
What?
How did you stay in touch with her and your family? Like, keep in contact with them while you were gone?
Oh, my family?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wrote to my mother almost every night, and I wrote to my wife every night. Sometimes the letter wasn't very long, but it was a, hi, how are you, blah, blah, blah. But it was sure nice to get the letters. And I sort of was a champion among the fellows overseas. I always got more letters than they did.
After your training experience, where did you go next?
You're talking about boot camp change?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I went to New York City for about 3 weeks, and then they stationed me in New London, Connecticut, where the sub-base is, the submarine base is, and I was there for about, I think, 18 weeks. No. Oh, I don't know, quite a little while, and then they transferred me to a lighthouse on Race Rock, Connecticut. I could tell you about that. During peacetime, the lighthouse is a service very similar to the post office, postal service. But during World War II, the Navy took over the lighthouse service and ran it, and so we had to put in some time out there. I was on this lighthouse about 2.5 months, meaning I would go to the tower, 85 feet in the air there, you know, and look around and punch a clock every 15 minutes to make certain that I was there. And we made all kinds of reports that we saw. But it was mainly to man the thing. After all, those lighthouses are very important, but also gave us training in recognizing aircraft and ships. Mm-hmm. And the first time I saw porpoises come up and take their breather, I thought it was sharks. Scared stiff.
What was your job what were you assigned to do while you were...
On the lighthouse or later?
Both.
Well, just the lighthouse, I was just a seaman, and that meant I would go on watch and look out through this little cubbyhole thing about this big for 4 hours, 3 times a day. 3 times a day. Later, I was transferred to radio school and became a radio operator and went overseas as a radio operator.
And what kind of experiences did you have with being a radio operator?
Well, Attu Island is the last island in the chain of Aleutians. There was a time when the Japanese were pretty well entrenched all around that area. They had a lot of fishing going on, and then there was a battle, and they slaughtered about 500 Americans. Well, as the war went on, that didn't sound like much, but at that time it was a lot. But we drove them out of there, and the Army took over Attu Island, and the Navy then set up a system called LORAN, L-O-R-A-N, meaning long-range navigation. It was a slave station. Adak Island had the master station, broadcasting of radio waves for the navigation of planes. We were a slave, so we broadcast a beam also at the same frequency. And then Amchitka was another island that was a slave. They had one also. So some of the people on our base in Attu had the job of watching an oscilloscope and keeping these three signals in synchronization in order that the planes might use it as an accurate guide. So we never heard of any results. We don't know. We assume that some of the bombing was going on from there.
Did you ever know of any casualties or anything?
I'm sorry?
Did you ever know of any casualties?
I'm afraid I don't understand.
Do you remember anyone that had passed because of the war, or anyone in your unit, or just someone that you knew?
Gee, I feel terribly ignorant. I'm sorry.
Do you know anyone who died because of the war, or
Oh.
had anything?
Do I know of anyone who died because of the war? Well, in our own or our extended family, there was no one like that. We had nothing like that. No, I guess I don't. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it was a terrible strain on my mother, because 5 of us were in the service at the same time, and then my oldest brother, who had 3 children, was drafted, and at the end of the war, so she had 6 children in the armed forces. You know, it must have been a terrible worry for her. My twin brother served on LSD, and LSD is a huge barge-like ship with an end gate that falls down so that they can go up on a beach, and they loaded tanks and so on that ship, and men too, and they would go on to an island and drop the end gate, and the tanks and everything would roll out, and the men would roll out. He was in 23 invasions of that kind. My older brother then was a radioman. He went to radio school before I did, and he was on a destroyer escort for 2.5 years in the South Pacific.
Where were your brothers located at?
Pardon me?
Where were your brothers located at? You said one was in the South Pacific.
You mean where do they live now?
Where were they located during the war?
Oh. Once more.
Where were they located during the war? You said one was in the South Pacific.
Yeah.
Where were the
The others.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. The one who was just older than I was on a subchaser for 19 months between Boston and Greenland, and his job was they escorted troop ships and other ships from Boston to England and so on. And I don't know why Greenland was involved, but that was a base to turn around. And then the oldest brother, who had the children and was drafted, he was in Germany in the Army of Occupation. He was a driver of officers' cars. I guess you'd call him a chauffeur.
Did you ever see any combat while you were overseas?
No, not really. Among the men, yes, but that was no, not really. And your interview would be lots more interesting if I had.
That's not true.
How did you and your friends in your unit entertain yourselves?
How did we entertain ourselves? Well, I did a lot of drawing. Art is a hobby of mine, and I did a lot of drawing. When you're on a 6-hour radio watch, and you're off in a remote area like that, you don't have an awful lot to do. You're sure to watch and take care of the international SOS frequency, and then our own frequencies for radio to the District Coast Guard office in Ketchikan, Alaska. But generally, there was an awful lot of free time just sitting. So one 6-hour period, I would draw noses, and the next time I'd draw ears, and so on and so forth. And in the meantime, I did a lot of exercise with the chair, like pushing up and this and that kind of, because boy, you can really get soft if you don't keep doing something. At midnight, we'd be pitching horseshoes because it was broad daylight. And then if we happened to be off duty and went to bed at 6 o'clock, it'd be broad daylight again. And a lot of people didn't like that kind of thing, but I really got so I enjoyed the land of the midnight sun. It was fun. We did a lot of hiking around too. We'd run on to abandoned Eskimo villages and that kind of thing. I remember many times looking down, and here's a guy looking at me, part of the skull, and lots of whale bones. One time several times we went fishing. One time we rowed a boat. It was supposed to have a motor on it, but it didn't work all the time. At any rate, we rowed across Nevadiskov Bay to do some trout fishing. Well, we cheated. We didn't fish for trout the way it was supposed to be done, but the machinist mate was a clever guy. I don't use it as a scrounger. He was a scrounger. You know what that is? I never heard of that word, probably. Well, a scrounger is a guy who seems to be able to get a hold of anything he wants. He got hold of some dynamite caps. So we went to this little river on the other side of Nevadiskov, and with one or two of those caps, we just had hundreds of trout, And on the way back, the motor conked out right in the middle, and so there were 4 of us in this boat. We pumped and pumped and pumped and pumped. We couldn't get the darn thing to going. Finally, we had a lot of lines and hooks and so on with us. I put hook and line over the side. No bait. We didn't have to. And this is the gospel truth. I pulled up a cod about that long, could just barely lift him. And he was smiling. I don't think he realized what was in for him. But anyway, the Japanese had been driven out of there, so the fishing lands or waters were just absolutely abandoned, and those fish they had a heyday. So there were a lot of fish.
Do you have any other humorous or unusual memories?
Unusual memories. Well, I remember VJ Day, and I turned another radio on so everybody could hear San Francisco, and they were just going wild in San Francisco, you know. I don't know. The man who had been in charge of that Loran station was a brilliant man. He had a degree in electrical engineering and I don't know what else. He was just brilliant. But he had been there 28 months, so he was about ready to fly. They replaced him with a man with a new gold braid. He was a brand spanking new commissioned officer, and he didn't even know Morse code. That fellow was just a complete washout. Anyway, he gave us a lot of trouble. And anyway, that's all over with now.
How did you feel on VJ Day?
How did I feel on
VJ?
On VJ Day? Oh gosh, just as if had been reborn, you know. Oh, I forgot to tell you. You see, we were married in 1944, May 26, 1944. I came home after radio school, which was a 6-month course. I came home on May 1st, thinking that, well, he was actually due. The baby was due, but he didn't come, you know. And so there I am in Seattle walking the halls of the telephone company, and finally Betty answered the phone, and we had a baby boy. I didn't see that boy until he was 11 months old. But after, I think it was about at the end of a month up there in that too, in the mail I got a great big photograph of my wife holding this boy. He was grinning, and he's been grinning ever since.
How many of you were at your station?
26. It's a pretty lonely place. Not a tree on the entire island. There's a lichen that grows so that it's like a big thick carpet everywhere. We did some skiing, but not very much. They're called Attu Mountains, but they're not really mountains. They're just big hills. But skiing was fun. Gee.
What else do you remember about the islands?
What do I remember? Well, I guess I remember that they were kind of barren except for this lichen, although you did find strange-looking little flowers that were blooming in the summertime. Between my radio, where I was in the radio shack, and our quarters where we lived and so on and so forth, was about, I think about 75 yards. And we had a wooden walkway. But beside that walk were some steel stakes and cable, because the winds are just unbelievable in that part of the world. It was not uncommon to have winds of 100 miles an hour without a storm, you know. These buildings were Quonsets, meaning they were put into the ground. Most of the Quonset was covered by ground. But one storm came and tore the roof off one of those Quonsets. Well, you can imagine what kind of a wind it was. My recollection of the islands is that they were terribly windy and not very cold. I don't think it ever got colder than 20 above in the wintertime because it's so far south. And then you have the Japanese current of the Pacific Ocean coming up this way. That's why it warms part of the coast of the West Coast, coming down, you know. Well, I thought the islands were pretty from a distance, you know.
How bad were the winters there?
Pardon?
How bad were the winters
Oh,
there?
well, as I say, not nearly as cold as Iowa. No, no. Terribly windy, but not very much snow on that too. I don't know why. Maybe it just blows past and lands someplace else. I don't have any snow fences.
Where were you at the time when you heard about the surrender of Japan?
When I heard about what?
The surrender of Japan.
When I heard about what?
Japan surrendering.
The what?
When Japan surrendered.
Oh, you mean the end of the war?
Yeah.
Oh, I was on radio watch in that too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Isn't that funny that I don't understand? I mean, the weakness of the brain is supposed to be here long before my age, but it seems to have been coming just recently.
What did you experience about the native culture there? Was there anything interesting?
No, we were not in contact with any native culture. No, just the abandoned villages where we could see that we could see needles made of bone. You know, we could see some other things that were made from whalebone and so on.
Of all the things that you did during the war, is there anything in particular that you are proud of?
Well, I suppose I'm proud that I didn't wind up in the brig more than 3 times. I did wind up in the brig 3 times, but generally I got along pretty well. And in radio school, I was in a class of 160 men. It was 6 months of radio school all day long, and I graduated second highest. So I was proud of that. My wife is still singing about that, for heaven's sake. She just finds it so hard to say nice things about me that she grasps anything, you know.
Tell us about your experiences of winding up in the brig.
Oh, in the brig? Okay. Well, every single time was a question of terrible injustice. I mean that. I'm not just saying it because it's me. Well, for instance, New Year's Eve, I was in New London, Connecticut, waiting to be transferred to the radio school, and we were in a hotel that had been bought by the Navy and turned into barracks. So our room had 6 bunks in it, meaning 6 guys were in this one room, and all the rooms were like that. Well, I was the only one in there who wasn't, who was engaged to be married and all that kind of thing. And these other guys went out on the town and just raising heck, you know. Well, there was a regulation that a fire watch guard walked the floors every 15 minutes, you know, and it was 6 floors, so it was a very, very necessary kind of thing. But he also would put you on report if you were not in bed after a certain length of time, maybe 2 o'clock. Well, about I think about 1:30 or so, these guys came in just drunker than heck, just raising heck. Well, I talked to them, managed to keep them shut up until this guy went by, and twice or 3 times like that. And so the next morning, I got up and went down to breakfast. I leaned up against the wall to wait for breakfast because I was that much early. These guys didn't get out of bed. They just stayed in bed in their dress blues, you know. Went to the first hour class. Class began, and the instructor stepped up to the mic and said, "Wait just a minute here." And 2 military police came in the door and announced that they had come to get. Well, I can't think what they called me now. Anyway, Pace. And they took me to the office of the executive he was the second in command of the school, a guy named Ireland. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for Ireland until that guy came along. Anyway, I walked in the door and he said, "You're charged with refusing to get up this morning?" And I said, "No, I don't want to hear a word out of you." 5 days in the brig. They took my clothes away from me except a pair of dungarees. That was all. Well, as I say, it was injustice, wasn't it? Why, if I were in the service now and they'd try that, I'd have that guy's rank, because I'd see an officer who is able to do something about it. Well, the other 2 were similar situations where it was unfair, you know. Anyway, but in those days, the Articles of War, gee, they just allowed a commissioned officer to do almost anything. It was terrible.
What did you do after the war?
Went to Drake University immediately, and took a part-time job with Hawkeye Casualty Company, doing the credit report on international business machines. And I majored in Spanish, minored in English, minored in French, and got a Bachelor of Arts degree. Started in June and graduated in June, 3 years later, because we went to summers and all.